So thank you so much for the invitation. This is the first time, even though being born and raised here in the Bay Area, that I've actually come to the Samsung Innovation Center. So I'm really excited about this. Beautiful campus. A little bit about my background for those of you that don't know. Enough science to choke a horse. So undergraduate at Berkeley, PhD in neuroengineering with Richard Thompson. Most of my work was in better understanding the mechanisms of learning and memory. Postdoc at Caltech. Before I turned 30, I founded 4 companies. 2 have since exited, thankfully. And one's a CPG company, Women's Health, and one's a medtech diagnostic company in women's health as well. In the last couple of years, I'm sure you guys have noticed there's been a huge interest in healthcare, in biotech, and in digital health. So I also did some work in the venture space, worked for a few venture capital firms here in Silicon Valley and in Southern California, helping them build their sort of digital health and biotech arm. Since joined Khosla Ventures about a year ago in EIR there with a specific mandate to build healthcare companies that leverage artificial intelligence. We'll be launching a company in the next month, actually, that's going to be in the skin microbiome and AI space, so keep an eye out for that. And also manage a UC Berkeley fund. So if there's any exciting deals that you might have, please send them my way. Always looking. So I met Rafa in one of my classes. I teach 2 classes at Stanford. One is an introduction to artificial intelligence. The other one is an introduction to artificial intelligence with an emphasis on how to build neural networks. But today I'm going to be doing something a little bit different. I think that's a little bit more aligned with our current environment, and that's trying to understand or better understand the role of artificial intelligence in healthcare specifically, and especially given my background and my expertise in this sort of area. I'm sure that you guys have come, at least through osmosis, to realize that there's kind of an explosion happening in artificial intelligence. You're hearing it over and over again, companies that are utilizing AI. Whether they're using it or not using it is another story, but they're definitely using the buzzwords, that they're using AI and machine learning and deep learning. And we're seeing a huge emergence of these buzzwords in healthcare specifically. And people in the healthcare sector are incredibly excited about this, because now you have a new tool to really try to solve some of these really complex questions that we have in healthcare. Healthcare, I think most of us would agree in this room, is a very complex field. It's a field where, unfortunately, a lot of the methodology that physicians and clinicians have in their tool set are like 50 to 100 years old. Like I was arguing a little bit earlier, a mandate for a lot of surgeons is when in doubt, take it out. Can you imagine how terrifying that is as a patient to be on an operating table and a surgeon looking over at you and saying like, you know what, this looks kind of funky, so let's just take it out to be safe. And the hope is that we can actually bridge that a little bit with innovations in computer science and artificial intelligence and more sophisticated pattern recognition to be able to enable these physicians to have better tools at their disposal to make better decisions on how they want to execute their care. But the other argument is that healthcare has always been apprehensive to innovation. Clinicians are not huge fans of digital tech. They're not huge fans of software. They despise the EMR. I've actually sat in several rooms where I have clinicians yelling across the table, being like, because of you, I have to spend hours a day inputting data into an EMR, and I can make no use of the EMR. And I was like, not me. Like, EMR was privately owned. That's not what we do. We want to be able to try to address the pain points that clinicians have to be able to allow them to treat their patients in a way that is patient-centered. Since the last 5 years, you're also hearing an emergence through the healthcare community around patient-centered care. This idea that you're not treating the disease anymore, but you'll be treating the patient. And one of the biggest obstacles we have in trying to execute this task is there's a tremendous amount of heterogeneity within patients. So why a certain patient gets a certain illness and why certain treatments are best suited for that patient, we still have no idea how to understand that, let alone be able to replicate that across different patient sets. So I'll be talking about the rise of artificial intelligence in healthcare, how along a patient's journey, AI is sort of stepping up and trying to address specific pain points, and to be able to see what the innovation in the future of artificial intelligence in healthcare is going to look like a little bit. So are we set? We good? All right, awesome. So let's start. All right, healthcare and what to do with it. Healthcare is hard. It is not an easy field to be able to address. There are a lot of moving parts within healthcare. You have the providers, you have the health centers, you have the unions, and even the few companies that are trying to aim to try to bridge the gap between healthcare and traditional healthcare providers and the methodology that they use to provide care with innovations in artificial intelligence, machine learning, deep learning. There's always been a sort of disconnect, and most of the disconnect comes from the fact that these two fields have been sort of in isolated towers independently. Very few healthcare providers truly understand what AI actually is, truly understand what the capabilities of AI actually are. And then most computer scientists here actually don't truly understand all of the pain points that a clinician has, let alone really understand health and health care, because they just haven't been trained in that sector. So how do you get these two disciplines that have been so isolated and it's kind of in ivory towers for a very, very long time to be able to merge and come and connect together? But before we talk about that and talk about how healthcare and AI can actually merge together in a very synergistic way, I'm going to just start about how I'm going to define artificial intelligence for the purposes of this talk. So artificial intelligence, for the purposes of this talk, is essentially an agent that has the ability to be intelligent. And intelligence, for the purposes of this talk, we're going to define as the ability to be presented with a tremendous amount of data, to engage in some type of learning, whether that's understanding patterns in that learning, whether that's looking at certain trends within that data set, and then when asked to execute a task, they'll be able to leverage that learning to be able to execute that task. So are we good with the sort of the definition of artificial intelligence? Presented with a lot of data. When you're presented with a lot of data, be able to leverage that data set and to learn from that data set and to be able to utilize that learning to execute a specific task. So an analogy that I use in my class that tends to help a lot of students grasp this concept, if I had a very, very young child, a toddler, if you will, and I wanted to teach this child the concept of what an apple would look like. An apple, essentially, I would present that child with thousands of images of apples, different color apples, different shape apples, apples across different backgrounds, and images of things that are not apples. The child will look at all of the images and realize there's some patterns. Like a lot of the images that she will see would be like, they all have similar features, similar colors, and I can be able to decipher based on some pattern recognition an apple versus a non-apple. And then I test her. I'd be like, well, here's an image of a banana. Can you tell me, based on your learning, whether this is going to be an image of an apple or not? And the hope is that she learned correctly, that she essentially would be able to decipher that that image of a banana is indeed not an image of an apple, and to be able to tell me that. That's essentially how we're going to define artificial intelligence for the purposes of this talk. A simple agent that you essentially present thousands of images to or data sets to, whether it's supervised or unsupervised, and in this case with the toddler, supervised learning, to be able to tell them exactly what the inputs are and knowing what the outputs are going to be. And then when you ask them to execute tasks, they know exactly how to do that. One thing to emphasize here is that artificial intelligence is mirrored on human intelligence. It's unfortunate because we all know that human intelligence is not without error. So therefore, by definition, artificial intelligence is also not without error. And this is a huge argument that a lot of clinicians make. Like, if you were wrong with a patient can actually be seriously injured or perhaps die. And the argument that AI folks have with that is that, well, if you're wrong with the patient, the same sort of outcomes also hold. So I wanted to also show this. I think this is a very, very kind of powerful slide, sort of the explosion of artificial intelligence and innovations across multiple sectors. You're seeing the use cases of AI anywhere from banking, fintech. I thought I saw a company that was leveraging artificial intelligence in travel, and definitely in healthcare. I mean, things as simple as voice recognition, companies like American Express are using to be able to determine whether or not someone that's calling on the other line is pissed off enough that I need to get them straight to a representative, or not pissed off enough that you can still get them to go through the automated system. And that's just pure on the resonance that's happening in the voice, and to be able to allocate emotion to that. It was actually a piece of technology that came out of the MIT Media Lab. But let's take this where you have these different AI companies across these different sectors, whether it's vision AI, chatbots, business intelligence, commerce, fintech, and let's rearrange this in a way that talks about the different types of AI that these companies are utilizing. So it's not that companies are wanting to leverage AI and AI innovation, but it's also that within the AI field there are different components and different subsubjects that are specific to very specific tasks. I mean, you have speech-to-speech translation, natural language processing, you have visual recognition, machine learning, and different types of AI that can be leveraged to execute different tasks. One thing that's really interesting to note is that artificial intelligence is not something that's new. It's been around since like the 1960s. The very first neural network, if you will, the perceptron, the very singular unit of the neural network, was uncovered in 1965 by McCulloch and Pitts, who actually were neuroscientists just like myself. And artificial intelligence have gone through these like spring and winters, these summers and winters, if you will, and it's been directly correlated to the amount of funding that was deployed within artificial intelligence. So today, when you have this explosion of artificial intelligence, where you're seeing this emergence of the use cases of artificial intelligence, you see a tremendous amount of push within the academic and research institutes in AI. The understanding is that it's been correlated because a tremendous amount of capital has been deployed in this space to enable these innovations. But it's not just that. Now more than ever, you seem to have a convergence of three key things that are enabling these innovations in AI, enabling sort of for this explosion of AI, something that is happening today in our history that's unprecedented, and that's the convergence of essentially data, technology, and analytics. For the first time in the history of AI, in the history of the use cases of AI, we're amassing a tremendous amount of data that we have never come across before. And it's not just the access, the volume of data, but the quality of the data has significantly, if not exponentially, improved over the course of the decade. And for the first time, we actually have the hardware that's enabling us to actually do something with the data. One of the very first AI system was a simple decision tree that came out of MIT. It's a slang technology made by a graduate student there, and its task was essentially just to be able to solve differential equations and to see if this simple decision tree can be able to execute differential equations as at least the same success rate as first-year MIT students. The computer is actually sitting in the computer science building at MIT, and it's legit the size of this wall and could only compute like 30 kilobytes. I kid you not. And today we have with the graphic processing units, we actually have hardware that can actually not only hold the data, but be able to do sophisticated things with the data. And so this combination of access to the hardware, access to the data, the quality and volume of the data has really has become a catalyst for sort of this AI explosion. And lastly, the analytics. A lot of the algorithms, like the neural networks, it was a concept that was really kind of isolated within the field of academia. There wasn't a lot of business use case for it at that time because of the lack of the data and the lack of the hardware. But we're starting to see now sort of a trickling effect where you're having algorithms and theories that are sort of leaving the iron institutions of scientific academia and going and actually having real-time use cases. There's been a paper that was published within the last year by some of the founders of DeepMind who have made another argument that's incredibly compelling that I also will reiterate today because I think it's incredibly powerful to do, is that a lot of the underlying foundation for artificial intelligence today has come from theories and algorithms and our understanding of how humans learn that predate into the 1960s and the 1970s. Since then, our understanding of how the visual cortex, sees images, the concept of geon theories, how the possibility of the human brain breaking down every single object into these individual units called geons and recapitulating them back into those objects is a little bit better understood. That was sort of uncovered in 1986. And Hassabis and his colleagues at DeepMind made this argument in Neuron that we need to go back into neuroscience, go back into our biological inspirations of learning so that we can uncover and better understand how the human brain processes sort of this vast amount of information, how it's able to execute this sort of these interesting phenomenon, with the hope that we can bring that understanding back into AI, just like we did with our early understanding of neuron-to-neuron communication and the development of the perceptron, to build the next generation of artificial intelligence. You know, one sort of argument was this phenomenon that's sort of recently uncovered called offline experience replay. It's a phenomenon that the brain actually does when you guys are sleeping. If you had learned a task that day, whatever electrical stimulation was affiliated with that task that was recorded, when you're sleeping or when you're offline, for some reason your brain will repeat that same electrical stimulation, almost as if your brain is replaying that learning during offline periods. We have no understanding of why the brain does something like this, but it's a very fascinating phenomenon that people in AI think they want to be able to mirror in artificial systems, and see if, like, offline, can artificial systems be able to learn and to replay their learning so that they can, you know, increase the efficacy of their learning. So that is sort of our definition of artificial intelligence, sort of a little bit of like the background of the emergence of artificial intelligence, the argument of going back to biological systems. Now let's see if we can sort of utilize, you know, our tools today in healthcare. There's a tremendous amount of value in AI, the different use cases of AI in healthcare. And as difficult as it may be for some clinicians to want to be able to adapt innovations, there have been use cases over use cases of successes within the artificial intelligence community where they've been able to show that things as simple as IBM Watson's platform in its ability to I think IBM Watson is a sort of a simple natural language processing, but essentially IBM Watson was training for a really, really long time to be able to take the radiology exam, which means it would be able to scan images, X-ray images, and with the hope that with a high fidelity, you can actually pick up cancer versus non-cancer, tumor versus non-tumor, at the same rate as radiologists can do. There is another piece of AI that came out of Stanford within the last 18 months that was a simple neural network that utilized the images captured from iPhones to take images of moles and abnormal skin growths, and to be able to successfully diagnose, based on solely the images that were captured by the iPhone, whether it was cancerous or not cancerous. And they were actually almost, if not as efficient as dermatologists were, if they were actually more successful in being able to do this diagnosis. So one of the things that I wanted to emphasize that I think is important about, this slow trickle of artificial intelligence within healthcare is the rapidly changing data environment. For a very long time within healthcare, physicians would still write down a lot of their notes. Since the emergence of the EMR, this electronic medical record, you're having sort of an electronic transfer of a lot of these physician notes, patient medical histories, clinician histories, as well as patient prescription histories. But even EMRs today, even though they try to attempt to be electronic, I think most of us in this room, if you don't know, a lot of the data sets are sitting in silos, and they're not super centralized in a way. And a lot of companies, especially digital health companies and AI companies, that want to make use of that data set to be able to build their AIs to learn off of it, are having trouble because the data not only sits in silos, there's also a tremendous amount of noise within the data. So that has been a huge pain point for AI scientists to be able to make use or build agents that can learn from this data set, these massive EMRs, is one, being able to get access to them. HIPAA regulations have been a huge pain in the butt for most artificial intelligence scientists, and trying to get access to that in a way that's de-identified. Two, trying to be able to transform these massive data sets in a way that actually is useful to their agents when they're training that agents. And three, the hardest of sort of all of these three steps to be able to do is to be able to decipher enough learning from these data sets after you transform them and got access to them that you actually can create some value to the clinicians, actually generate some clinical insights that physicians can actually execute on. But it's changing. I mean, now that we have, collection through mobile phones, EMRs, you're actually getting a push with a lot of healthcare centers taking sort of the physician notes, the radiology reports, and transferring them, digitizing them. Images, the radiology reports, the x-rays are also being digitized. And another incredibly powerful tool that's emerging in artificial intelligence in healthcare is actually the mobile phone. There have been studies that have shown that patients that have used their mobile phone and used digital health apps in their mobile phone are actually more honest and open with their digital health app or with their mobile phone than they are with their own physicians. And so they're finding an incredibly powerful tool through the mobile phone. And the thing is, the mobile phone is generally with the patient almost every single day throughout most of the patient's day-to-day activities, and they tend to engage on average a couple times a day. That is definitely a type of reach that a physician just cannot have. And so that has emerged as a really, really powerful tool. I think in some regions of the world, including MENA, you have this generation that spends close to anywhere between 7 to 8 hours engaged on social media apps a day. So mobiles have become an incredibly powerful tool in sort of taking AI and healthcare and being able to create some synergy through it. So now we're also thinking about how do we sort of reimagine data. For a very, very long time, in the goal of utilizing machine learning and the goal of utilizing data analytics in healthcare, companies including, your traditional data analytics folks have been always thinking about data in this sort of linear way of, okay, here is this problem that we have. How can we go back to the data to figure out if we can uncover insights around this problem? So like, for example, something along the line is like a hypothesis-driven approach to data. This group of patients, for some reason, all have developed cancers in their early 30s. What can we decipher from this group of patients? And that has sort of been the approach in healthcare and leveraging data. It's been this hypothesis-driven approach. But I think people in the AI space are forcing clinicians to think differently about how to utilize that data. It's not about uncovering a problem and then going back to the data to try to figure out solutions. Maybe it's about just allowing this sort of raw access to data, and the hope that with raw access to data, with this sort of unsupervised learning on the data, that you can actually uncover insights in a sort of organic way. One of the use cases that we actually had at Khosla Ventures for something like this is, in the skincare space. So one of the companies that we will hopefully launch the next couple of weeks is in the acne space. And one of the things that it did is it essentially said that, patients that have acne, they're utilizing mostly antimicrobials. When in doubt, ablate everything, right? So salicylic acids, the benzoyl peroxides. The idea is that if bacteria is causing acne, we'll ablate all the bacteria in the skin. But we're recognizing that ablating all the bacteria in the skin is actually detrimental to the patient in the long run. And so the quality of the skin actually, deteriorates over time. And there are actually good bacteria on the skin. And even more fascinating is that bacteria, the P. acne, bacteria that people have been correlating to acne and that acne has kind of been named after, or bacteria has been named after this, has strains of it that are actually present on healthy skin. And so we did this massive sort of study. We're like, okay, we're just going to get a ton of data from patients that have acne and patients that don't have acne. There's no hypothesis here because, quite frankly, no one really knows where acne is coming from. We have no idea why these patients are getting acne. We just need to understand what's happening with these bacterial populations. And we had a patient, this young girl, beautiful young girl, 24 years old, and she had gone to her dermatologist. Her dermatologist, prescribed the first line of care, the retin-A's, the tretinoin, the benzoyl peroxide, the salicylic acid, and she had the redness, the dryness, and she got to the point where her acne was not clearing up. And what was really interesting about her acne, it was only localized to one region of her face. It was not something that was sporadic throughout her whole face. And she got to the point where her dermatologist had gone through all of the first-line cares and were like, the second thing we can think about is Accutane, which is this incredibly harsh drug that she would have to go in for like monthly blood draws to make sure that her liver is not damaged. If she gets pregnant during the course of the Accutane, her child will have severe deformities, and she has to sign all of these release forms. So before she decided to go on the Accutane, she came onto our trial. And we're like, look, we're just trying to understand the best that we can. Tell us your day-to-day, input these data points into this telephone, and into the telephone, can you imagine, I just said telephone. Into your phone, and was it on here that I like read it off of? And let us take images and try to understand what's going on. And then through the course of, there was no hypothesis, we were just learning from this. And through the course of this, we recognized that her acne was not because of bacteria. Her acne was because of her shampoo. So when she was washing her hair, the shampoo had a film in it to like sort of like retain moisture, like this Pantene film. And she was not washing the conditioner off her face. And so like the conditioner was creating a small film on the side of her face, causing the breakouts. And so you can see like a very real use case of like not this hypothesis driven, like here's a problem, how do we create the solution, looking for data sets that can fit a hypothesis or to try to fit a particular, solve a particular problem, but just organically, gathering data and allow learning to come from that data at the hope that you can generate insights from that data. So we are seeing this disrupt industries across multiple sectors. Gaming, crowdfunding, virtual augmented reality. There's this huge push in utilizing VR and AR in surgery, and as far as like training patients. Very few people are deciding to become cadavers, so there's a little bit of a problem as far as actually aggregating cadavers for patients to practice on. And I think most pre-med students and medical students would agree that practicing in cadaver is nowhere near what's actually happens in the OR when you're looking inside of a patient. I had a physician who was a bright girl, adored her, actually tell me when she did her rotations through surgery, the attending had pointed to an organ inside of a patient and asked her what that was. And of course, being a pre-med and ambitious and wanting to get every answer right, and that one kid that, when you were in undergrad was always ruining the curve, she actually literally listed every single organ but couldn't figure out the right organ. And he was like, dude, that's the stomach, like, right? And so utilizing VR and AR to be able to help, these medical school students, these patients to be able to train in sort of an innovative way as well has been a huge push in this and huge innovation in this space. Robotics, another one. We had the Da Vinci robotic arm for a very, very long time. We're seeing an emergence of next generation robotics and stents and medtech devices to help physicians be more sophisticated about their standard of care. And so just a little highlight of the different regions and different vectors that AI has been sort of disrupting. So let's go through sort of the value chain of the use of data, use of artificial intelligence in healthcare. So I'm going to be going through and talking about 5 or 6 very specific sectors: the future of care delivery and surgery, the future of the patient and patient care, and the future of healthcare operations. This is sort of provider care, administrative costs, the future of research, and the future of precision medicine and medical education. I talked a little bit about medical education, so like helping physicians and helping medical students, be able to be better prepared when they're actually out there on the field. I think a lot of physicians feel that their medical school training, though great, they really didn't know how to treat or interact with a patient until they actually were in residency or actually were interacting with patients during the rotations. And most would agree that, that interaction with the patient, that hands-on interaction was so much more powerful to have in their education than like the book learning and the memorization, though that's also incredibly valuable. Precision medicine is emphasized around this concept of personalized care, this patient-centered care, where you're no longer treating the disease, but you're actually treating the patient. That every single patient is going to experience a pathology in a different way. So instead of treating the pathology, you treat the individual. And there's a huge push to be able to try to do this. The only issue is that there's so much heterogeneity from patient to patient. How do you best decipher what's a variable of value and what's noise? And has been a ton of work that's been done in the genomic space, in the epigenetic space, to be able to see if we can figure out if there are indicators within the genome or indicators within the epigenome, even the microbiome, if you will, that we can leverage to help us be able to do more personalized patient-centered care. And the future of research. So I'm a scientist by training, and a lot of the work that we do in academia that have been the precursors to innovations that will end up being in the clinic are done on toolkits and on systems that have been archaic. So it still takes me 3 days to run a Western blot. Like, that's to determine whether there's a presence or absence of a protein. We could not sort of monitor behavior in a single cell until quite recently. When I did my PhD with Richard Thompson, they had developed a hypothesis in 1986 that there was a protein that was critically involved in the process of learning and memory. Now, this particular protein, what it would do is it would actually go into the neuron, and in the neuron, when a neuron is actually activated, will engage in would enable structural changes within the neuron. And as a consequence, that is sort of the underlying explanation for learning and memory. But this was a theory until I entered. So when I entered graduate school, I developed a single cell probe that enabled, for the first time, my PI, who was working on this theory for 25 years, to see this protein in real time actually traffic through the neuron when we activated it and actually engage in those structural changes. So you can imagine how powerful innovations on the research arm can be to be able to help be able to push these sort of preclinical insights into the clinic faster. And emphasis on cheaper too, because NIH is not funding the way that it used to fund. So God help us. And then the future of care and delivery. Like, how can we enable our physicians, our scientists, our surgeons to have the best possible toolkits that they're not only excited to be able to utilize, but toolkits that they also can utilize to the day-to-day in a quick, cheap, and fast way, and that they don't consider hindrances. There's been a huge fear within the medical and healthcare community of AI replacing jobs, right? Replacing clinicians. And just like it's been a fear across other sectors of AI taking on, the jobs and replacing the jobs of other sectors. I mean, AI no longer has essentially taken over the jobs of travel agents, I think, is one of them. What else has it sort of replaced? A travel agent, amongst other things that, pieces of AI, pieces of simple systems have actually been able to take over the jobs. But, people within the healthcare community also have the same fear. So Vinod Khosla has sort of, published this healthcare manifesto. It's 110 pages on the Khosla website if you're interested in reading it. But he actually says something really interesting in there, and he said that, the hope is that, if we can put enough innovation and enough, backing between innovation in artificial intelligence and machine learning, we can replace 80% of physicians with artificial intelligence, and the remaining 20% of physicians can be super specialized to be able to execute tasks that, the other 80% can't do. And you can imagine this pissed off a lot of clinicians, right? But his point was not to show that, we're completely wiping out or transforming the healthcare system and wiping out and transforming the physician occupation. It's about changing the day-to-day tasks of physicians. So if a patient comes in and has a common cold, that takes time from a patient to be able to treat other patients that have more serious symptoms, or it takes up time. Patients that come in with non-emergency ailments into the emergency room. That is an incredible burden both on the healthcare system as well as the providers there. And how do you become more cost efficient there? Radiologists are seeing the same thing of like, okay, there are thousands and thousands of images we can see. We've been trained on how to be able to look at these images to decipher if there are certain pathologies here. But there's a lot in the raw images that at the human eye we cannot make much use of. And maybe something like an AI platform can be able to go into the raw images and to be able to decipher a lot more than we can actually decipher from it. And what value can we create from that? So let's go into the future of care and care delivery. So some of the drivers within care and care delivery have been artificial intelligence, robotics, AR, personalized medicine. And a few of the companies have been doing something in this space. And this essentially is, how do we take care and care delivery from this archaic space of being back in the physician's office, being in, the healthcare center, and, going back to the patient, right? So this concept of the phone constantly being at the patient's disposal, a patient being more engaged with their phone, with they are with their physicians, patients being more honest and open with their health app than they are with their physicians is a powerful trend that we want to try to make the most use of. So how can we do a lot of this through these pieces of technology? Can we do diagnosis early? Can we do, patient monitoring at a distance so that they're not coming in for, periodic monitoring? And some of the companies in the space that are trying to do this, you have companies that are enabling sort of like virtual doctor-to-doctor, doctor-to-patient care, as well as avatars that are helping patients with outpatient services, so post-operative experiences, having a simple chatbot to walk them through the post-operative care, as well as what to expect with their therapeutics if they're taking therapeutics, and then for patients that have chronic illnesses to be able to monitor them long-term over the course of their ailments, and to be able to treat them in the comfort of their home, versus having them just constantly engage and come and be sort of a drain on the healthcare system. The future of surgery also leverages a little bit of artificial intelligence. There's a lot of work that's being done in this space in the medtech community, a lot of venture investment that's being done in this space. Some of the interesting thing is the use of Oculus Rift to be able to allow AR and VR to be able to lead surgeries with actually opening out a patient, a huge place here. Real-time surgical theater to be able to utilize CT and MRIs to be able to see behind arteries or behind organs without having to move those around, or to be able to see through different regions of the patient so that they can actually better map the surgery before actually executing it. And Philips, GE, all of them have been sort of venturing in this space as well. The future of the patient. So a couple of companies here that have been doing a lot of work in digital health and actually creating digital platforms to treat the patient and the individual. One of them is Ginger.io, which is actually a Khosla venture company that we've invested in, is essentially be able to aggregate behaviors in a telephone to be able to predict mental health quality, and to be able to offer insights and to offer sort of a treatment plan through that. There's another company called Paratherapeutics that's doing something very similar in the schizophrenic space. So it utilizes engagement on your phone, behaviors and trends of your engagement on its phone, and it can actually predict with high accuracy whether you're having a schizophrenic event or not. And if you are, you're able to engage with that patient and alert the right individuals to make sure that the people are alert that there is a schizophrenic event. One thing to emphasize is about 5 to 10 years ago, the FDA had no idea what to do with these platforms. These platforms were essentially offering the ability to make diagnoses, to make medical claims, to be able to offer treatment plans. And there was no mechanism within the FDA to be able to sort of figure out whether there is a digital health app capable of doing this, let alone the capabilities within the FDA to be able to assess this. But now you have these digital health apps that are going through the FDA, through this 510(k) process, that is enabling them to make these sort of medical claims, to be able to determine whether the digital health app or this piece of AI actually has the right accuracy, where it actually has the right data set to be able to treat these patients. And Paratherapeutics is one of the first companies that are going through that 510(k) process. And the future of healthcare operations. So care at hand, being able to take a little bit off of sort of the healthcare system as a whole. Making sure that the physicians and making sure that the healthcare providers are actually focusing on the patient and taking the burden away from them having to do sort of the day-to-day tasks, the operative tasks, and creating platforms and enterprise software that can actually be able to engage and do those capabilities. And the future of research. So using AI to be able to better understand disease, better understand patient heterogeneity within patients, better understanding the hypotheses that we've had for a very long time, and to be able to push that to the forefront and to be able to make better innovations around that. Human longevity, Kaggle, Claritex Genomics, these are all sort of companies that have emerged. A lot of companies have also emerged around the protein and drug development areas, where they're using AI and they're using simple machine learning tools to be able to see if, one, they can uncover new targets for therapeutic development, which means they're better understanding how proteins fold. They can create more specialized targets for those proteins. Two, You have this phenomenon that's happening across a lot of pharmaceutical companies, GlaxoSmithKline, GSK, Bristol Myers Squibb, where you have drugs that have been shelved and been sitting in these graveyards for a long period of time that they're starting to uncover that they can actually utilize for different use cases. So there is this push within the AI and artificial intelligence, the AI space and the machine learning space, and even in the data analytics space, to be able to see if there's a mechanism to rescue these shelf therapeutics. The beauty and power around this is a lot of these shelf therapeutics have already gone through certain phases of the FDA, especially the toxicity and safety, which seems to be the most high-risk component of this entire process of bringing a drug to market. And to be able to piggyback that and give them a new indication and fast-track them through the FDA. So a lot of pharmaceutical companies are really excited about this as well. So there's also this huge push towards precision medicine, treating the patient, no longer treating the pathology. And the way to do that is to learn as much as we possibly can about the patient. There's been a push in the microbiome space, learning as much as we possibly can about the patient biome, a push in the genomic space, learning about genomic dynamics and behaviors on an individual level. 23andMe has been incredibly successful in this space. Illumina has been at the forefront of doing this. And this is exactly a great example where the hardware and the access to data is enabling this explosion. Sequencing a patient 5-10 years ago, very, very expensive to do. Now, a couple $1,000s, we can get an entire sequence, and we can actually hold the data set someplace that we can actually make use of it. So huge, huge push in this area of precision medicine. And the hope that precision medicine is going to be sort of the next generation of how medical care is going to be delivered. And then medical education. The idea is that the better we educate the next generation of scientists and healthcare providers, the more we can get them to be comfortable around utilizing these tools early on in their career, the easier it is to transition these toolkits into the healthcare space. The biggest obstacle we've had in AI, the biggest obstacle we've had in taking our AI tools and taking it into the clinic is we've had apprehension by the healthcare providers. The healthcare providers look, we've been utilizing our methodology for a very, very long time. It works. In their head, it works. And it's hard to get healthcare to innovate. It's not built to innovate. And one of the hypotheses that we have is that if we can catch these future physicians, these future scientists early enough in their career and start engaging with them and start to teach them about the potential of artificial intelligence and the potential and use cases of these tools early enough in their career, they will be much easier to transition these toolkits when they actually are in the clinic. So how do you take all of these sort of potential use cases? You have this entire value chain across healthcare, and you had all of these potential of AI being able to address these things specifically, and you have examples of companies that are doing that today. And whether they're doing it effectively or not is an entirely different argument, but they are trying to go after this value chain and provide value across this, and going after trying to address specific pain points. But the home run is, okay, great. I need you to show me, for most clinicians are arguing, I need you to show me that your toolkits can actually be of value to me. And that's been the hardest part for AI scientists is, yes, we can aggregate all this data, we can learn from this data, but we need to show that the insights that we're generating is of value to clinicians. And that's been really hard for a lot of companies and a lot of academics to be able to do. It could be because of the limitation of the data, it could be because of the noise within the data. And then people who have uncovered insights, it takes a very, very long time and a tremendous amount of capital to actually show that those insights work in a patient. So even though there's a tremendous amount of potential of innovating healthcare utilizing AI, it still has a very, very long way to go. And a lot of the emphasis is now from moving away of getting access and convincing physicians to doing it in parallel versus with physicians to be able to uncover these insights. I have less than a minute left, so I think I'll just stop it here versus going into the next section. So I think we'll end the lecture here. Right. Thank you.
Any questions?
My question is about you touched on the subject of neuroscience models in deep learning models and AI. I want to see your opinion about what is the state and there, because I know some companies, for example, Jeff Hawkins' hierarchical temporal models, they're working on some sort of creating new models inspired by neuroscience. Is there any activity sort of in that space that is some sort of converging these two spaces?
I think there's a tremendous amount of activity that's happening both in the private sector and in the academic sector. Most of it is kind of limited to our understanding of the brain, right? So we still don't know how the brain does simple processes, right? And as we're uncovering these phenomenons, gradually through biological research, the hope is that it will inspire artificial intelligence, but AI is actually making an attempt to see like, well, you know what, if we're uncovering a piece of AI that has a biological root, chances are the likelihood of that AI being correct is actually accurate because it has that biological inspiration. And on the converse side, AI is actually utilizing these biological phenomena as inspiration for itself. But both, a lot of activity happening both in the private sector, Vicarious AI being an incredibly famous example of actively going back into neuroscience and seeing neuroscience phenomenon to best inspire next generation AI.
Thank
you.
Is AI being used in the alternative medicine space? The second question is, apart from neural model, there are other models of brain like the holographic model. And the neural model led to the development of this generalized function that you use to recognize objects. So is some mathematics being done to incorporate the holographic model and use it?
For sure. So on your first question of the use of artificial intelligence in alternative medicine and osteopathic medicine, a ton of work actually being done there. A couple of companies emerging on trying to better understand that. There's a company actually I was talking about earlier called based out of Cambridge that is going into the nutraceutical space and trying to figure out if they can use nutraceutical targets to be able to treat pathologies. On the second part of your question, I just don't know enough to know if there's anyone right now actively going to see if we can do underlying algorithms to mirror the hologram method.
What eventually will be the impact of AI upon health insurance coverage?
Sure. I think most providers, most AI folks would argue that we're going to drive the cost of care down, right? If we're making our physicians more efficient, we're keeping the patients from making unnecessary trips to the hospital, and we're enabling on an operations level, the operations to be more efficient, that we can drive the cost of care down. Granted, on the converse side, AI is expensive, right? And so if you're taking a platform, you're taking a healthcare system and a healthcare center that have been utilizing the same methodologies that have been utilizing for 10 years and all of a sudden asking it to rechange its entire service and to rechange all of its architecture and so that it can be able to be synergistic with an AI, that takes initial capital upfront to do it. But the argument is over the long course of providing healthcare provider, it'll be more efficient. That's the argument. Yeah. Sure.
Yes, thank you for the presentation.
Sure.
So I'm wondering about how you would apply essentially AI so that now it becomes more reliable than a physician. A lot of models such as adversarial networks, where it aims for precisely that. What would you think how would that work in the healthcare industry?
Sure. So the example that I gave was a paper that was actually published. It's in Nature Communications that came out of Stanford, where a simple neural network, it was like a sophisticated neural network was put in place that with images captured of moles or abnormal skin abrasions, they were able to, with really high fidelity, be able to do a correct diagnosis at an accuracy rate that was equivalent to a dermatologist. And the understanding is that, even though AI is mirrored on human intelligence, its computing power is significantly greater than human intelligence. And so 5 variables or 6 variables that a dermatologist may have to decipher an irregular growth or a cancerous growth, color, size, shape, borders, an AI can utilize 100,000 times more variables. And so the hypothesis is with more variables, more computing power, and in access to the granularity of data that far surpasses what's capable with the human eye, it has enabled this piece of this neural network structure to be able to be more efficient than a dermatologist would be. Yeah. Does that answer your question?
My question is, assuming that My question, assuming that this is proven now in the science, how will that play in the healthcare industry now?
Sure. So you can imagine a lot of healthcare providers are not super excited about the fact that a computer can do what they're doing. But the argument is, just like Vinod had mentioned in that paper and that I sort of also agree with, is you no longer have to do that. So you can focus on, incision, creating the care, working with the patient to figure out what the right therapeutic plan is. And if you're catching those patients early enough, you've now significantly increased the efficacy of your treatment, and therefore, as a physician, your goal is essentially to be able to do that anyways. Sure.
Hi, it was a great
Yeah.
presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
So, as far as what I know, that data plays a very important role in AI.
Yes.
So, for the vast majority of data, healthcare data out there, they are unlabeled. They might have information about the feature. So, how do you feel about should we just use the unlabeled data to use some unsupervised machine learning, or
Yeah.
we should just ask some technicians or someone who has the specialty to label those data and then use those data as the label data? So which way do you think it might be more
Sure.
efficient?
I mean, unsupervised learning is just hard to do, right? And there's a little bit of a black box event that happens in unsupervised learning that can be dangerous, especially since we don't know how it's learning and what it's learning on. Most of the data that you will come across in healthcare has to be de-identified just so you protect the patient's privacy. But there will be some labeling, like you'll know like the drugs that they're taking, their age, their pathologies that they and their family histories. So I think at least as a starting point, going and doing like supervised learning where there is labeled data is probably the best way to go. Remember, the problem is not the data, and I would say the problem is not the volume of data. I think the volume is generally there now. It's, the data is organized in the way that it's really, really hard to make use of it. Like, transforming the data takes a tremendous amount of capital and tremendous amount of manpower to do, because a lot of these data sets are sitting in silos and there's holes in the data sets. So like, a patient could be seeing a physician for 10 years and all of a sudden the patient never sees a physician again. And then you have a lack of an entire region of that patient's like history missing. Or so I think the quality of the data is, I think, a big problem. Transforming that data so that it's actually used and can be used is also a little bit of time consuming. And then, like I had mentioned, like, okay, what are the questions we're going to ask here? Like, what questions can we possibly ask given the data that we have, and what are the questions that are going to be really important here? That's going to make the biggest impact in the patient's life. And if we do, and I didn't have a chance to talk about it because we didn't have enough time, if we do have an actionable insight, how do you convince the patient to actually engage in that? Like, most patients that are on Crestor or on have type 2 diabetes can manage that without being on metformin or any drug by eating healthy. But they don't want to eat healthy. I mean, my father is a diabetic. He went to his physician. It's a very famous story in our family. He told the clinician that, look, every night when I eat a pear, it like spikes my diabetes. And my physician's like, well, you know what? Eat half the pear at night and half the pear in the morning. My dad's like, that's not happening. Like, that's just like, that's too much for me to do, to eat half the pear, then resist the other half and just like wait in the morning to eat it. So getting patients to act on that actionable insight is also like an entirely different set of problems that we as AI folks have to like engage in.
Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank you,
thank you guys
Sohila.
so much. It was a pleasure.